Story 1. The Ghost in the Basement. I live in a suburb in the northeast of Chicago. The neighborhood I live in was built in the late 1970s as summer homes, but they're now occupied year-round. Since the house on the northwest corner of the intersection was built, every family that's lived there has had someone living in the house die unexpectedly. The belief here is that those people haunt at least 2 of the 4 houses at the intersection. The one at the northeast corner and the one at the southeast corner, my house. There are 3 known deaths that have taken place in that house. An older man drowned in the bathtub. A baby fell out of a second-story window. And a little girl whose cause of death is unknown to anyone in the neighborhood. Each family moved away shortly after the death occurred. The family that currently lives there has a son who was about to commit suicide when he received a phone call on the home phone, and the family member went to look for him. They still don't know who called him. The number was untraceable, but this prevented his untimely death. My family has lived in this neighborhood for a number of years. We purchased the house from other family members. We were told then that there was something wearing parachute pants that lived in the basement. We were told that doors would open and close without anyone near. Things falling over. Strange things of that nature. But we, of course, thought nothing of it. Soon after moving in, my father had to go overseas for work. At the time, I was not living in the house. It was just my stepmother. At night, she would hear the swooshing of parachute pants and see lights going on and off. She called the police more than once, only to have the house and the perimeter searched and find nothing. No trace of anyone having been there. My father and I, after his return, witnessed it as well. Both of us were upstairs, and we hear our very heavy garage door open and shut. It was during the day, so the idea of an intruder didn't even cross our minds. Dad searched the house, and I searched the grounds. We both came up with nothing. Our house is not the only one that's experienced things like this. The house north of ours, directly across the street from the home where people have died, has a little girl haunting it. Shortly after we moved into our home, the owners of the house north of ours sold theirs. I befriended the daughter of the family that bought it. Her and I had many sleepovers together, and we would always hear the little girl laughing and whistling in the middle of the night. As it turned out, the previous owners had experienced the same sort of thing, as well as toys being moved and their dog barking wildly at idle children objects. Perhaps the most convincing thing happened rather recently. In the basement there are cold spots. Lots of cold spots. And when there's candles lit, they flicker wildly, no matter how new or old, hot or cold, freshly trimmed wick or what, they flicker wildly. I spend a lot of time in the basement, and I often hear parachute pants. Recently, a very close friend of mine, who didn't know about our haunting, spent the night. We were sitting quietly in the basement, with candles burning, when one began to flicker. Suddenly, my friend began to sob, as if moved emotionally. And then he said, "Don't be afraid. He's not mean. He's just fascinated with you. Not humanity in general, just you. He likes to come visit when you're writing and when you're burning candles." A few seconds later, The flickering stopped. I asked my friend what he was saying or doing, if it was some sort of prank. And he said that he felt like he was being told what to say, like he was channeling a thought. To this day, I have not told my friend about the guy in the parachute pants that haunt my basement. Nor have I actually decided if it was parachute pants channeling through my friend to speak to me. Story 2. Struck by a Ghost. It was the mid-1970s, and I was about a year and a half old. My parents had rented an apartment in a small town in upstate New York. My mother was never a believer in ghosts, and all that changed in this apartment. The young couple who had lived there prior to us had a new baby, and the father worked nights. Being it was an old house converted into apartments, the living room in our apartment had a door with a chain lock. The young mother thought the house was haunted, and while her husband was at work, she would lock her and the baby in the living room until her husband's shift was done. My mother thought it was a little weird, but thought nothing of it, until one night my aunt and uncle and my grandparents were over playing cards. They were all in the kitchen area, at the dining room table, and that is where the entrance door to our apartment was, and where the outside door for both apartments was. Our door was all plate glass, and beyond that was the stairwell leading to the upstairs apartment. As they were playing cards, they heard walking across the floor, dishes rattling in the upstairs apartment. They thought nothing of it. That is until they both saw the upstairs tenant walk in the front door. My father called to them before they went upstairs and asked if they had anyone staying with them. They said no. Why do you ask? My father proceeded to tell them about the noises they had been listening to. So my father and the husband of that family went to check everything out. They found nothing out of the ordinary. I developed an imaginary friend named Steve. I would talk about Steve to my parents, and they would just shrug it off. Sometimes I would go to my mom and say, "Steve hit me. Tell him to stop." My mom would do that just to make me feel better, but she didn't actually believe in Steve. One day I was in the playroom with Steve, and my mother was doing dishes. She could see me perfectly from where she was, when suddenly I screamed, "No, Steve, please don't hit me." And just then my mother saw me flying backwards as if I was struck. She ran in and picked me up. I wouldn't calm down. I begged her to yell at Steve and tell him to never hit me again. My mother obliged me. She yelled, "Don't you ever hit my daughter again." I calmed down, and she told me to never talk about him again. Some years later, she told me the story, and I had memories come back to me of that apartment. I described to her a man in a dark coat, with glasses and yellow teeth, standing over my crib. She had no recollection of anybody in our family or friend group that fit this description. I get chills to this day whenever I have to drive past this house. Story 3. Ghost Story. When I was younger, about 8 or 9 I suppose, my mother and I used to hear a baby cry. Whenever we would go to bed, I used to hear a tapping noise every single night. When I told my parents, they thought it was due to an overactive imagination. Don't all parents think that, though? I definitely know I heard it. I never got up to investigate. I suppose at 9 I was a bit too scared to go down to the basement alone. Supposedly, where our house was built used to be land where Native Americans camped. One of the best experiences I had was one afternoon I was sitting in the living room with my mother. I was sitting on the couch so I could see down the hallway. At the time, I was not looking at the hallway, and I heard my mom say, "Oh look, we have a visitor." I thought she meant that someone was in the driveway. I turned around to look at her, looked down the hallway, and saw a white mist floating from my mom's room to mine. It didn't have legs or a body really, just a misty white form. It didn't even really seem to notice us. My mom has the ability to be sensitive to ghosts. Passed over relatives have visited Mom rather often. When I was in college, I remember one night I was driving my boyfriend's car back to his house. It was about a 45-minute drive. It was the dead middle of winter, and all of a sudden, the car filled with the smell of fresh flowers, as if it was the middle of summer. This has happened to me a couple of times, as well as in my apartment. In the fall of 2000, my best friend was killed in a tragic car accident. I took his passing very hard. But the interesting thing was, about 4 months after his death, my room in the apartment got very cold and stayed cold. Every other room would be warm or comfortable. I remember saying at one point, "Okay, Tom, I know it's you. Could you please make it warm up again?" And instantly my room would warm up. So at least he listened to me and wasn't too much of a nuisance. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, give me a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, drop me a comment down below. I love hearing from you. Bye.